Welcome, History 101 students, to week 5 of our survey of Western civilization. We just finished up chapter 4, our second and final chapter on ancient Greece, and now we're going to segue into history of ancient Rome. So while our textbook and this course pretty much follows a chronological progress through time, basically chapters 4 and 5 cover the same time period. As you may recall from chapter 3, ancient Greece is pretty much founded in the 8th century, and we followed that into the 4th century when ancient Greece became part of Alexander's empire, and then after that, after his empire broke up, into the Antigonid kingdom. So ancient Rome is founded during the same century, the 8th century, and it begins as a kingdom, and then as a republic, segues into a more democratic form of governance, expands throughout the Mediterranean, and thrives for about 500 years before it becomes an empire led by a single person, an emperor. And this period of time, which begins with Octavian, historians call the Principate. Octavian saw himself as the princeps, the first citizen of many citizens. But even though many of the institutions of the Roman Republic still continued over his 40-year reign, most of the power of those institutions waned, and he pretty much led as a single ruler, almost as a dictator. Two individuals in this chapter, chapter 5, kind of help to illustrate this transition. The first one is Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus, and you can find an image of him on page 150. A 5th century farmer citizen, first and foremost a farmer, but he must have had some very strong leadership capabilities because he was elected as consul. In the Roman Republic there were 2 consuls, and basically those individuals are the executive branch, have executive leadership in the Republic. But the other kind of interesting office in the Roman Republic was the dictatorship, and the Senate, under times of emergency, would elect an individual to hold full, complete, and all power, and that person was a dictator. And that period of time could be 6 months at a time. So during an emergency in the 5th century, the people of the Senate of Rome, went to Cincinnatus and asked him to be the dictator to get Rome out of this emergency situation. He accepted the dictatorship and freed Roman people from this emergency, but instead of taking advantage of that full power and wreaking havoc on his enemies, right, and maybe ending the Republic and becoming an emperor himself, he gave up the dictatorship after only about 2 weeks. About 20 years later, he had another opportunity to become dictator, and did likewise. He fulfilled his responsibility as a citizen, and then gave up the office and went back to being a farmer. So you can see a picture of him on page 150. The second individual, who I mentioned earlier, Octavian, you can see an image of him on page 166. He is basically the first emperor of the Principate, the person who basically ends the Roman Republic. Luckily, he was a good emperor, and ushered in a 2-century period, Pax Romana, kind of peaceful years of the empire. So 2 individuals kind of illustrating this movement from Republic to Principate. I had a question from a student asking me about time in history, so I thought maybe I'd spend just a little bit of time talking about that. You've probably seen that this textbook cuts historical time into half. And one period of time is called BCE. Second half of time is called CE. So that's BCE stands for before Common Era, and CE stands for the Common Era. And we are presently in the Common Era. Now, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, when I was in college or studying high school history, history is cut into two pieces as well too. But the time before the birth of Christ was deemed BC, BC as in before Christ, and the time after the birth of Christ was deemed AD, Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord. So, and you will still see BC and AD used in some history books today, but more and more historians are trying to get away from a more Christocentric historical calendar. So the idea is, of course, there are many religions represented throughout the globe, and not everybody's happy about keeping track of time based on the birth of Christ. So the idea is to still keep that same, middle time. The birth of Christ is basically year zero, but they've gotten rid of the Christ, right, and the Anno Domini in the year of our Lord, and they've given a new name called the Common Era and before the Common Era. So a little bit more neutral language. The other thing about time is, if you happen to come across or read some primary documents during the Roman Republic, you're never going to read something like, in the year 160 BCE, because of course Christ had not been born. The way that individuals during the Roman Empire kept track of time was in relation to the administration of a consul or an emperor. So during the reign of Octavian, a writer would say, for example, in the 20th year of the reign of Octavian, X, Y, and Z happened. Or, later in the, 10th year of the reign of Adrian, or X, Y, Z happened. It's not until the 6th century that a Christian monk by the name of Dionysius Exiguus proposes the idea of splitting historical time in half and making the turning point the birth of Christ, and then time before then is BC, before Christ, and time after the birth of Christ is AD, in the year of our Lord. And so it took some time to transition to that, but it's really only in the 6th century and after that that you will read historical documents that say, in year 700 AD, right, such and such happened. So a little bit about time, and then the Roman Republic. I do have the typical discussion boards this week, so be sure and check those out. And looking forward to a good week. Take care.